Welcome to the very first Lima Charlie webinar. My name's Christopher Luft and I'm one of the senior technologists here. Before I get started, I just want to thank everybody for coming today. When we first started thinking about doing this, we weren't sure of the format, but based on the response we've received, I would say it is a success. So thank you. Today's talk is on external services, which are basically a set of capabilities we've added to the Lima Charlie platform, which allow developers to easily create their own information security products that leverage the full power of the Lima Charlie cloud and endpoint. Users are then free to monetize those new products through their own service offerings or through the Lima Charlie marketplace. It's a very exciting time for us as a company, and we can't wait to see what you build. After I finish talking, I'm going to introduce the presenter, who is going to then talk for 45 minutes, at which point we'll move into answering questions. If during the talk you're struck with a question, you can enter it into the chat next to the stream window. We will not be answering questions during the talk, but we will answer them in order after. And I know a lot of you box out an hour for events like this. So we're going to try and keep it under 60 minutes, but our schedule is open. So if things go long, there's no problem on our side. Yes, if you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, whether we're announcing new features, new training material, or additional webinars, then you can subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow us on LinkedIn, or get at us on Twitter. We're active on all three of those social media platforms, and any announcements we make will propagate through those. Also, we encourage everybody to join our community Slack channel. The link for that can be found in the footer of our website at limacharlie.io. It's a great place to ask questions. There's almost always a Lima Charlie team member on there, and we're not scared to get technical. You'll also see community members answering each other's questions a lot of time as well. Also, if your company onboards with us, we can set up a private channel for you where we can talk about any issues that might be a little more sensitive. Lastly, I'm going to send out an email later today or tomorrow with a direct link to the recording of this talk. And I might sneak in a link to a questionnaire in there as well. It'll be really short, and I encourage all of you to answer it. I'll stop short of begging, but the feedback we get from you does a lot to help us figure out how we should build and what we should build to make the best tools available. So with that, it is now my honor to introduce Maxime Lamoth-Broussard. Max is a good friend of mine. We went to university together way back in the day at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, where we studied computer science, after which Maxime went to work for the Canadian Intelligence Agency, spent some time with CrowdStrike, Google X, and was part of the founding team at Chronicle Security before leaving that to start Lima Charlie. So needless to say, Maxime knows what he's talking about, and I can't wait to see what he has for us today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Max.
Excellent. Awesome. So super happy to be talking with everybody today. This is kind of like the first one of those. So we think that we're probably going to do a lot more. We really want to kind of shift into gear and really communicate better, like the types of features and the integrations, and help people and do all of that. And that will be one of those mechanisms. So I will begin today by going just through a few slides, and we'll kind of go over the basics. So we'll talk a little bit about, first of all, what are services, what they're structured, what they're for, and kind of the basics to get up and running. So how to like create your first service and, like ping in, like see things are working. And then we'll also hopefully at the end kind of touch a little bit on what some cool stuff looks like with those. So why services? That's always the first good question. So can people hear me, just to make sure? Okay, sorry about that. Technical issues, first time. We're good. Right. Okay. So why services? The main reason is that we started Lima Charlie. I'm sure many of you have heard this before. We're really trying to take the approach of AWS infrastructure so that people can build on top of Lima Charlie. And we've had the API and the SDK, but really at the end of the day, those work great for kind of ad hoc, little by little, integrations and things like that. But we saw ourselves when developing new features for Lima Charlie that there was a need to have some kind of abstraction and simplicity to build those kind of rich features that integrate pretty deeply in Lima Charlie, but to be able to do that in an easy kind of way that's kind of not necessarily within the Lima Charlie infrastructure. So building rich integrations, automation, and products is really kind of where we came from. And you might have seen already some of the features that we've been releasing have actually started using that. And we're now exposing this, and we're hoping that people can start using it. And as with everything that we do at Lima Charlie, we have a very tight feedback loop with how people use the product and how we can, really make it work for people. So we did not want this to just be, toys or an IOC watch list, but we really wanted this to be rich integration and kind of fulfill that vision. So services. What are they at a kind of a more concrete level? So they're custom logic that you own. Very basic statement, but the idea is custom logic, meaning you really decide exactly, what it is, just in the same way that if you deploy an AWS Lambda, Cloud Function, or container, it's your own, and you own it, meaning that whatever logic runs in there is not something that you have to make public in Lima Charlie. It's really your own. This logic can be triggered at various points of the Lima Charlie infrastructure. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens in Lima Charlie, right? You have endpoints, you have logs coming in, endpoints coming in and out, and in different organizations, because Lima Charlie is just inherently very multi-tenant. And we wanted to make it possible for a service to be aware of those things in a very easy way and to react to those cues as what is going on within Lima Charlie. So you'll be able to get those triggers, and you'll see what that looks like. We wanted it to be very easy to deploy and scale. Again, we're multi-tenant first. It doesn't mean you have to be multi-tenant. You can happily create a private service that is on one organization or a couple of private organizations. But whatever we build, we wanted it to be very possible to extend to n number of organizations and scale with that. So what that means is that this service lives anywhere that you'd like. And really the only requirement is that it talks over HTTPS and JSON is kind of the language. So very universal language on the web. As long as the Lima Charlie clouds are able to reach your service and talk over HTTPS, you're good to go. And again, kind of around the multi-tenancy, we wanted to bring in kind of the core native concepts so that adding this multi-tenancy afterwards is not difficult if you want it. So okay, that situates a little bit what a service at a technical level is. We're going to talk about the inputs and the outputs in a way of the service. So what does the service receive and what can it do? And then how can you give feedback from that service? So the input is fairly straightforward. I kind of mentioned having various triggers. So here's a couple of examples. It's not complete. The doc will go over more of them. But recurring interval, that's just like a cron job, but we actually go the extra mile to make some things easier for you, where it's not just a cron job, but you can actually specify, you know what, I would like, yes, to be notified every hour of this, but I want every sensor to get one of those notifications in my code. So I don't want to track all these things. Just call this function for each agent at each hour. And that really simplifies, kind of some of the boilerplate code that you might need. You can do the same for organization level. So if you have 100 different organizations that are subscribing to your service, you can get notified in a very kind of clean way. There's lifecycle stuff. So new agents enrolling, for example. So, it's pretty common for a service to need to know, hey, there's a new agent coming online in one of the organizations. So for you to kind of get that notification. Detections, again, is a very common one. Maybe your service needs to listen for very specific events and trigger on those. And so you can subscribe to detections, get very kind of clean notifications. Logs being ingested. We released the Zeek service not very long ago. It's a good example of waiting for PCAPs to be ingested in an organization, and when those are, doing something. And finally, kind of an obvious one, but is to do direct requests. So it's possible to request something specific from a specific service, both kind of interactively or through the API, but also through DNR rules. A good example of that is we've released a dumper service that will dump all of the physical memory of a host. And you can actually request this from that service, even through a DNR rule. So you can automate now a lot of those lifecycle things. So the capabilities, I think, is really the core of what we're looking for here. When you create a service, you choose the required permissions. So just like an API key, you'll select what permissions you want. You'll say, I need this, this, and that. And when the service gets created, it will automatically get that set of permission for every organization that subscribes to it. Not only that, but we also simplified managing the credentials for all of this. So you don't need to manage credentials for all the organizations that subscribe to you. Instead, what happens is that your service, when it gets notified of those, those various inputs, receives, at the low level, it's a JWT, an authentication token with that specific permission set for that specific organization. As you'll see, we're going to be mainly focusing around the Python implementation that we've put out, just because it makes it very easy to get started. And in that case, you'll see that, in fact, what you get is you just get a pre-authenticated SDK for you, just given to your code. So you don't have to, get authentication or resolve anything or do any of that stuff. You're just given an SDK that's authenticated for you. You get full access to the Lima Charlie API. So it's a Python SDK. It's all there. It's entirely available. There's no limitations, and ultimately this code is executing, on your side, wherever you'd like to have it. You'll see we have some good recommendations on ways to make this easy, but it means that at the end of the day, it's Python code. So you can really integrate with whatever you'd like. So, we've made many services that, for example, will use, local executables. So we're working on something with volatility to do memory dump analysis. You can integrate with LDAP, with custom systems that you have internally that are not accessible to the internet necessarily. Any subscriptions, anything that you'd like. Really, there's absolutely no limitation there. It's entirely available. So finally, the output. It's probably not the greatest name. Really, what we're talking about here is giving feedback, right? It's great to have this custom logic that does stuff based on Lima Charlie things happening. But you want to be able to give feedback to those organizations, to those subscribers, to whatever is going on. Maybe it's a product that you're building on top of services, and you need to give feedback to your users. So the kind of main ways to do this, there's threefold. So first of all is, if it's a synchronous request, you can just return data to the user, and that'll be very easy. The really kind of more interesting two mechanisms that come with this are the jobs mechanism and re-ingesting. So the jobs, you might have seen already, depending on what you've used in Lima Charlie, are a way for a service to narrate some kind of job that it's doing for you. They will show up in the dashboard, and there's a screenshot here, but the idea is that you'll be able to narrate to your users what you're doing, how you're doing it, the timing of everything happening. And it's not just narration of, I'm starting to dump the memory from this host, but you can also add attachments and markdown to this. So you can really make it fairly rich. Attachments would be like a table. So you can include a formatted table for your users. It could be JSON data. It could also be a hex dump, where this is a technical field. So sometimes you want to just grab a small, bit of memory and do a hex dump with, the ASCII and kind of the real hex dump inlined in the job. So that's a good way to give feedback to users on things that might be taking a long time. I use the memory dump example. Memory dumps can take a while, so it's good to give feedback to the user, like, this has started, this is happening. The re-ingest part is really kind of re-ingesting within the external logs. For example, I mentioned the Zeek service that allows you to send PCAPs to Lima Charlie, and the Zeek service waits for those PCAPs, transforms them into Zeek logs, and then re-ingests them. So if you have, for example, a service, picking a random example here, but you have a service where you have your own detonation service, and you do a really great job at getting an executable, launching it within a VM, getting telemetry from it, or maybe it's a memory dump you're getting and you're extracting artifacts. You can extract, for example, PEs and stuff like that. You can then re-ingest them within Lima Charlie. And the real power there is, first of all, the scalability. Users don't need to manage, having files shipped around, but also that you can then, if you'd like, build another service that's able to interpret PE, portable executables or various types of files, or you can build detection rules based on those files as they get re-ingested. So the power is really an amazing force multiplier there. So let's get into an example. It's a lot of talk, and hopefully it gives you an idea. But we're going to step through an example. All of this is available through the public repo, so that we have, and we'll have links at the end as well. So you can absolutely get started that way. So we'll create a new service, test it, deploy it, and show a little bit of what it can do. First, I'll go over the high-level steps, and then I'll go in an actual shell, show you, step by step and a little bit of the code. So we won't get into too many technical details. Hopefully, we can do that at another stream that we do, but it should give you enough to kind of get started. So we have examples in our public repo. We'll take a blank template example, just copy that over. This example leverages the public container that we have that's pre-configured for an LC service. So it'll allow you to just drop in, the tiny Python file that is in the template, get executed, and get going this way. We're going to do a quick sanity check. So, ultimately the service is an HTTP server of some kind, API based. That means that you can do your testing entirely locally for as long as you want, do all that development. And when you're ready, then you can move on and deploy it. So we'll show you what that looks like. We'll add a little bit of functionality. So we'll add the DNR rule to our service, show what that looks like, subscribe to it, get a notification, And I think we'll go through a few tasking just to give you a little bit of the taste of what you could do with this. So I think with this said, we'll actually pivot, and I will go ahead and share my screen to a different window. Here we go. So let's get started. So this is the blank template that we have for a Lima Charlie service in the repo. Bottom part, you can absolutely ignore it. It's really all it's doing is it's starting the main class. As you get fancy into your services and want very specific things, you can get into it. But essentially, we just start serving HTTP and give over control to the Lima Charlie service. This is really where it's at the top. This is a tiny boilerplate code. You'll see that the general concept is that we have functions we'll define. Those are all documented into the repo and the README. You'll just define them, and you will get called back by Lima Charlie. So you don't need to maintain, a complex state unless you specifically need to, or to go and reach out to Lima Charlie and do things. Once you've created your service, Lima Charlie will take care of you and will reach out to you and take care of all the life cycle there. So in this case, you can see, on startup, I don't want to do anything when my service starts. I'll just print something when my service gets installed onto an organization. So when an organization registers to my service, subscribes to it, and the same for uninstalling. So with this, we can go right away and actually test this. So it's actually an entirely viable service. So I will just define a port and say that we want Python 3, and I want to start my server. Here we go. So it may not be the best way to visualize all this, but essentially you'll see some logging that the service is starting. So it's alive. It's totally fine. What you can do then, we're kind of going to show, the main utility that you might want to use is the simulator that we bundle with this. So the simulator is really a thin wrapper around HTTP requests, because that's all we deal with, to allow you to interact. So what we will do is we will just call the simulator and do 127.0.0.1.9.9.9 and health. The health command is just for us to interrogate our service, make sure everything's good. So we see everything's alive. That's great. So what we're going to do is the kind of the recommended way for you to deploy this, and what we're going to show as an example today, is using a Docker container. So we'll use their Docker container we have, and just to simplify things, we'll deploy it using Google Cloud Run, which allows you to kind of push a container to Google Cloud, get free HTTPS going to it with a public URL, and free scalability. It takes care of scaling horizontally your service. So that's honestly what we use because it simplifies so much of the management. So all you would do is you do a Docker build of this, and you can see that the actual Docker build is extremely trivial. So we just want to include our Python file. We're using the latest LC service, public image that's available out there. So you can build it. In our case, I won't go through it, but we're just going to push it to the repository, the container repo. And we will go ahead, and I will unfortunately have to switch again. Pardon me. All right, so we'll just go ahead, and we have a repo. We are going to take the URL for our container image. And Cloud Run, I'll just say create a service. I'll give it the URL for that service. In the US, that's fine. Allow unauthenticated invocations because we're not using Google authentication specifically for this. And I'm going to set a shared secret. This is a string of any kind. We recommend just using a GUID or something like that, that is used both by your service and the Google, the Lima Charlie cloud, so that your service can authenticate that the hooks it's getting from the cloud are legitimately produced by Lima Charlie. So for us, we'll just set this to AAA. We don't really care. And we'll go ahead and create this. So Cloud Run's just right now grabbing the container, pushing it to production. In a couple of seconds, it will give us an HTTPS URL. Again, the reference implementation we have is in Python, but the protocol used is all HTTPS, JSON, it's documented. So if you want to do a Go version of this, absolutely, you want to host it yourself behind your own load balancer, no problem. So here we get a public URL that we can use for this. So the next step that we will use is that we will actually go in Lima Charlie. And now we will create our service. So what we're doing in Lima Charlie is we're creating, in the same way that we used to be able to create add-ons, we can now create a service. And this will tell Lima Charlie clouds how it can reach our service, the permissions that it should have, all that basic information. So my test service, we don't have to include a bunch of information here. I will put the URL where my service can be reached and my shared secret. So pretty basic. Then I can see all of the various permissions that I can give it. And I'm just going to give it a couple of random ones. I don't really care. And finally, the flair that you can give the API key used by that service. So those are modifiers to how the API key that we're creating here will behave. This allows you to kind of fine tune how you want that service to be able to interact with your organizations. Very quickly, the bulk is telling the API, expect me to produce a lot of API calls. The lock is telling Lima Charlie that any resources that service creates should be locked and only deletable by that service itself, by nobody else. So this ensures nobody's overwriting what the service is doing with the organization. Secret tells Lima Charlie that the content of those resources, maybe it's a DNR rule that you're deploying to detect something, and it's a proprietary product you're selling, so you don't want it to be really visible by users. So you can make it secret. You can say the resources created by this service will not be visible by others. And the final one is saying this service doesn't need access to everything within the organization. It really just needs to manage its own stuff. So it will only be able to see, for example, DNR rules that it has created. It will only be able to see outputs that it has created. Things like that, all these resources. So this is a very important one in general, because it allows you to have a service that won't run amok and start maybe deleting outputs you've set up or things like that. So it's kind of a good safety unless you really need it. And we'll go ahead and we'll just hit create. And as we create this service, this gets sent to all of the Lima Charlie clusters worldwide so that the service is available. At that point, you will just be able to go into your organization, into the add-ons, services, and I should have my test service here. And as you can see, the permissions are listed, all that information, and you can just click to subscribe to it. And as soon as you do, you will see in your service logs, you'll see your service starting to receive contacts from the Lima Charlie cloud. So that's the super kind of quick life cycle of creating a service. I really recommend, if you're getting into this, to have a look at the public repo. We have some best practices and some tips. For example, if you're going to want to update the permissions to your service, there's some timing, that might need to propagate. So you might want to be aware of those things. But that's kind of a good overview. So what I will kind of pivot in and show a bit more of is, okay, now we know a little bit of how I can put my bit of code out there, how Lima Charlie can kind of start interacting with it. Let's see what you could do with it a little bit more. So to do that, I will go back to my shell, and we will look at a slightly different one that I spent 5 minutes before this to get set up, just to give you a bit of an idea. So here's a service built from the same template, and we're doing a few different things. So I'll just pan over a little bit. You see that it's probably like 30 lines of real code, if that. Here's what we're going to do. This service will create a detection, a DNR rule that detects user observed events. So when a new user is seen on a sensor, on an agent somewhere. So for example, somebody logs into a shared server, things like that. This rule, you can see, is defined here at the top. So, we're taking a very basic approach. We're hard coding the rule in a service because, it's a very core part of what this service is going to do. And what we're just saying is, if I see this event, I don't really care what's within the event. I just want to generate a new detection that we will call _ user observed. Could be anything. Note the _ at the beginning allows you to create a detection that will be shared, with your service, but will not go to the actual detections panel of that organization. This is not really a detection we want to report to users. It's just a way for us to get triggered on a specific behavior so that we can do the real work. So that's what we're doing. We are subscribing to this detect, and that's all you need to know. As soon as you've done this, as you'll set that DNR rules, you will potentially start receiving those detections. Let's look a little bit more at actually, applying that rule to the organization. So you'll see here we're saying that when on org installed, so somebody installed the service to an organization, first thing we will do is we'll call install rules. It's pretty basic. And all that we're doing here in this function is just saying, you know what, I'm going to instantiate a sync object from Python SDK that allows you to set in a idempotent way what the state of detections you would like in an organization. So if it's missing a detection, it will add it. If there's one that's too many that you've swapped out, it will remove it. So all we're doing is we're creating the sync, we're setting the rules, and we're saying push the rules and force it to remove older rules if they're not relevant. Notice that nowhere here are we actually dealing with creating an SDK or setting an organization ID or authenticating in any way. You just get an LC object. So you'll see that all of the callbacks in your service get 3 items. They get LC, which is a Lima Charlie manager, from the Python SDK. They get an OID, which is for your records. This is the organization ID we're talking about. And they get the request. So the request will contain a little bit more information, potentially about who's making the request, or data that's included in this request. And you'll see an example of that. So all of your callbacks get that and can kind of leverage this. So in our case, we're saying when we install the org, we install the rules. And every hour per organization, we're also going to do the same thing. We're going to resync the rules. That's just in case you update the rules in your service. Then magically, every hour, If one organization is out of date, it's just going to get updated. That's it. Then the really kind of interesting bit here is the undetection. So this will receive detections that you've registered for. So in our case, we'll just take, two pieces of information, the sensor ID and the username. The request the data is exactly the same thing that you get in a detection in the Lima Charlie interface or in an output from Lima Charlie. If you forward the detections to Splunk or whatever, it's exactly the same format. So in our case, we'll grab the sensor ID and the username. And this is a very fake example, but we'll say, you know what, if the username is my domain admin, it's a user I'm watching for, I'm interested, then I will, I'll log this, but I will create a sensor object for it. So lc.sensor with the sensor ID. So now I can interact with it. I will tag that sensor with domain admin for 10 minutes. And I will send an OS processes command down to that sensor. So in this example, it's pretty basic, but I want to just list, the processes that are running. But it could be anything. You have full access. So you can see the comment right below. Essentially, at this point, you could do whatever you'd like. You could integrate to a specific Slack channel, do emails, or kick off to some external system. Entirely up to you. And so that's just, we want to just give you a little bit of a taste of, what that could start to look like. I will finish this before going to questions with just a tiny bit. Let's go back to our slides. So we've covered this, deploying, testing, and some references. So this is services is a system of framework that we've started using, and it was developed for our own needs, right? There's nothing better than developing something for a very specific use case. And so there's a few services that have come out. We really want to encourage people to build either their own private, integrations or automations, happy. But we would also really love to see people starting to build things that are a bit more of a public service, whether monetized or not. I think we've seen a lot of chatter recently, in a couple of channels around things like, automated analysis, automated investigations or correlations. This framework is really perfect for that. And we really want to encourage you to kind of, start testing it and start developing on that. So if there's anything that we can do, and the following streams and kind of webinars we'll be doing will really be geared towards helping people ramp up with the various technologies, including services, so that you can get there. So if there's anything that you see that's missing for your use case, or you want to bounce ideas on how could X be achieved in a service, we are more than happy to help you there. There's a few references on screen. So the service repo with the README, a bunch of reference, all that stuff. The SDK for Lima Charlie that you can use in this as well. The container that's on Docker Hub that you can publicly access. And obviously the shared Slack channel that we have that Chris mentioned earlier. It tends to be kind of the easiest way for us to interact with everybody. Whew. All right. So with all that being said, I think we can start looking if there's any questions. I know it's a pretty big fire hose to work with. So we're not expecting everybody to be experts at all. And there is a little bit of a delay on the live chats. I think it's around 20 seconds. So, give us a second to kind of get caught on, or to actually, see it go through the stream. But you should be able to, go for it in the stream. All right. Could you share some of the use cases of external services? Yeah, totally. I think there's a few. I kind of mentioned a few already, but I'll actually go through a bit more of a list of internally where we've seen the hotspots and we've gotten to use the services. So memory dumper was a good one. So the memory dumper stages a specific payload on the organizations to dump the memory on request. So now it's available as an API for users through DNR rules and stuff like that. So it'll dump the memory, take care of waiting for the memory dump to be over, upload it, ingest it into a Lima Charlie, and do that and kind of notify the user through a job of what's going on. So it's an easy way then to automate all of the bulk, like 8 GB big memory dump images within Lima Charlie. The next steps that we want to introduce, I mentioned a little bit, will be making a service that will allow you to go through those images all within the Lima Charlie cloud with something like volatility. So that's one. Another one that we haven't really announced, but that's going to be released today, is the OTX integration. So this allows a user to set an API key within their organization, and the service monitors the OTX feeds. So OTX is Alien Vault Open Thread Exchange. So a lot of thread feeds, and will take care of kind of using those credentials, pull all of the pulses, the IOCs, create the relevant rules for the different IOC types in the organization, and load them up and do that continuously and update continuously. So that allows users now not to create DNR rules, not have to push manually feeds. They just one click and it's all taken care of. We've also, what are the other services? So Zeek, I mentioned. Zeek waits for PCAPs. So to be uploaded to the external logs capability in Lima Charlie, and then runs the Zeek framework over those PCAPs, takes all of the logs produced, re-ingests them within Lima Charlie. And then obviously, as part of the external logs, you can create DNR rules to, look for various things within those logs. And those are the use cases, the first ones that come to mind that internally we've kind of done. That does not cover, I think, a lot of other use cases for people like MSSPs. The one that popped into our mind was doing some LDAP integration. We think it would probably be great for an MSSP to be able to have an integration where a service that looks for users logging into various assets, looks them up in LDAP, and perhaps associate tags or different states or different rules for those users, integrating within LDAP in a very kind of customized way. So I think there's a whole lot more. Could I use it for detonating malware? Push files? Absolutely. This is absolutely a scenario we've been thinking about. So the question, for those not there, but if we could use it to detonate malware on some external service, for example, absolutely. And we like to try to do things within Lima Charlie at very large scale, or make sure they scale at very large scale. And it's really the only thing that has stopped us from kind of putting one of those out to see the feelers, because those detonating services tend to be a bit more expensive. But yes, and it honestly, it should really not be that difficult to do in a service. So we're happy to help you with that as well. Awesome. I don't know if there's any other questions. Can you expand on the roadmap? Yeah, that's a good question. So, thanks, Chris. So expanding on the roadmap, I think I mentioned it, and it's kind of worth reiterating for us, because we don't believe that we are the end all be all of the product and security, and we don't believe any product is that. It's great to have, products that do a lot from various vendors. But really, we think that there's a lot of value for security, organizations in being able to not just integrate, with like, a toy level of just, having, you can put the list of hashes and it detects it. That's great. But really to expand on that and make sure that, I think I've heard programmable EDR recently, and make sure that, the EDR that they have, the solution that they have, they're able to use to their full extent. We've been talking to so many folks around operational networks, production networks. So we are starting to support. We're supporting Docker, but the good thing about those types of networks is also that they tend to have very specific needs. And to be honest, no AV vendor out there, and I use AV as like a very wide term, is going to cater to those needs. And it's completely understandable. They're dealing with, if something's not infected by a million different, like a million boxes aren't infected by something, the chance of it being detected is, quite a bit less. So we think that for things like production networks, be it like factories or clusters online, Kubernetes clusters, or in cars, or in like phones is a whole different story. But like old hardware may be monitoring, various old assets, monitoring hardware, infrastructure. We think that there's a pretty big demand for people to be able to really orchestrate like the detection and the remediation at the level and in the way that they need to. So sorry, that's a really long way for saying we want to make sure that whatever we put out in the services serves a purpose for somebody. And we know that whatever the services as they are out there, there's going to be things we haven't thought about. And so the roadmap is entirely based on what people will build, and we'll make sure that that gets easier and easier to build those things, more efficient to build those things, so that we can achieve some pretty cool stuff. Yeah. All right. So seeing another one from Chris there. So how can external services be monetized? So I think you've seen a little bit through how things are set up with the very kind of basic marketplace that we have. The infrastructure is entirely there for you to get to a point where you say, you know what, this detonation service that I made is really cool. It works great. I'm sure people want it. And I would like to offer it to people through this marketplace. The whole permission scheme is managed in that way. It's a curated marketplace for services, as opposed to all the other add-ons. So we can have additional validation there. And this hooks also into the way that people can be billed for various services. So at the moment, you cannot just put it on the marketplace. However, know that everything is there to do that. So we're waiting to have those conversations with people that that are building those services and are interested in progressing and doing that. So we do have kind of all the classic setup, if you think about Google Play Store, for example, around basic agreements around being a developer, kind of putting your services on the store, how it works, how the monetization works, and all that stuff. So those are discussions we can't wait to actually have with people. Cool. So I don't see specifically any other questions. I will wait a little bit because I know there's the delay. But as always, Slack channel, really all the communication methods. I think if you're here, you've probably experienced that we're very, very responsive in those things. So any questions, any feedback, want to bounce ideas, like any of that stuff, we're always very happy to have those discussions. But I think that will be it for us today. I'll give it a couple more seconds. All right. Sounds good. Everybody, thank you very much. And yeah, give us your feedback. We'll see you the next time for the next one.